So, talking about the skill of investigation, what should we, where should we direct our attention? This wonderful mindfulness that we can now use to explore. It's interesting. Ajahn Amaro used to teach this in one way. He'd say you sit down and you get mindfulness established, and you're sitting there and bring up an idea into consciousness. This is actually one of the four kinds of mindfulness. Bring an idea to consciousness and watch the ripples that come out from it. And I'd heard him teach this two or three times, and each time the object that he brought to mind was mother, which I thought was cute. But you could pick anything if you wanted. John Peacock teaches metta as a practice by having you attempt to conjure well-wishing and kindness towards anybody or anything. And if there is a resistance, it'll come up. Sharon Salzberg says the power of metta is so great that it will show you everything that stands in its way. So, we're trying to develop a skill here, a skill of investigating. We can sit and be mindful for weeks and months at a time and deal with what comes up. My own feeling, I tend to be impatient. I'll talk about impatience in a bit, but impatience, if you have an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of typewriters, remember typewriters? And an infinite amount of time, and let the monkeys hack away, they'll eventually write all the great works of Western literature. Just random. Well, if you've got an infinite amount of time. So I don't feel that I have an infinite amount of time. So I would like to make this mindfulness experience as efficient as possible. So where do we direct our attention? I think I talked about this last month. I had this experience where I was got up in the morning to head to the store because I do my shopping at 6:15, senior hours, and so I get in my car and I zip off to the store, and I come up behind somebody who's going 20 in a 25, and I was sort of in a 35 and a 25 kind of mood. And unless you've always been the slowest car on the highway, you've probably had this experience. You come up behind and boy, you can feel, can you recall that experience? You feel it in your body. It's like, no. Is it just me? It's just me. Okay. So it's that, and of course what comes into your awareness is, well, I can't actually speak those words. Jack used to talk about how in a retreat setting, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could have the speakers in the room wired to your consciousness so everybody could hear what goes on. But of course you can imagine, and I realized at that moment that I was in a hurry and I hadn't even noticed it. And I could feel that in my body. And I thought about how that's the way it is with dissatisfaction generally, with dukkha generally. It's like the compressor in the refrigerator in the other room. When it goes off, you go, oh my gosh, the refrigerator was running, I didn't even hear it. Or the air conditioner goes off, and you realize it's silent, and you thought it was quiet before. There's this background unease. And there's a physical quality to it. So we want to investigate that, is the idea. And to investigate not just the object of our attention, but the way in which the engagement with that object happens. You're going to feel that in the body. The investigation is all important. Because if you tell yourself, for example, to let go, let go, let go, let go. Christopher Titmuss used to say, if you tell yourself to let go, you've already missed the boat. Because the mindful notation is holding on, holding on, holding on. Mindfully noticing what that holding on, what that's going on. The Tibetans say it will self-liberate, but you have to maintain the attention on that, on the physicality of it, and the attention will spring to the object and back to the reactivity. And so we want to study that feeling. I talk about complaint as a marker for our dissatisfaction, a marker for suffering, because it's an express declaration of dissatisfaction, whether it's justified or not. And complaints, we've talked about complaints, they're rooted in the delusion that things could be different than they are and that they should be different than they are. And of course that makes things worse. We add complaint to what's already unpleasant. But if we can feel the tactility of complaints are a great marker. Usually when I find myself complaining these days, my prompt to myself is, what was I thinking? What delusion was I under? Actually, we don't have to call it delusion. You can call it an assumption, which doesn't sound quite so bad. So what assumption? What delusion? What story? What was I thinking? And then, of course, you're still left with the unpleasantness, but you don't make things worse. So complaint is a really great marker. It's like the flags that they put on the surface of the water when they're scuba divers, so that you know that below the surface there's scuba divers. Well, this is something below the surface of complaint. There's dukkha. Not always easy to spot. Remember that Richard Farina book from the 60s, that been down so long it looks like up to me. Another place to take a look is something that I've been working with recently, is taking sides. It's come up particularly with the what's going on in the Middle East, and it's hard when you take sides. If you think of how do you feel about, do you take sides in the squabble in Northern Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants? Do you have a side there? Do you have a side in the ongoing animosities between the Hindus and the Muslims in India? Seriously, do you have a side? I don't. When you take a side, things are totally different, and you lose the ability to see. Well, when I look at these places where I don't take a side, I just see primates fighting and suffering. I see nastiness and anger, and that's what I see in those situations. If I look at Burma, I take sides, and it looks really different. If you're into sports, if you are a fan of the Giants and you're watching them play, you want them to win, and you can feel the physicality of it. And if you watch two teams in that other league, that you don't care about, you could watch the game and you'd watch it totally differently. You know what I mean? You feel differently about a match where you don't take sides. So watch the sensation of taking sides, that wanting, that longing, and the aversion that defines your sides. I was it came up earlier this evening when I was having a Zoom cocktails with some friends, and they were struggling with the Arab-Israeli situation, because the struggle was over which side should I be on, because atrocities and, oh, it's a bad, it's it just reveals the depths of anger, how profound that is, and people don't notice it. They just act it out. That's the way we are. We don't notice this stuff. We just act it out. So taking sides is a great place to look at the way we engage. Do we engage out of anger? Is there anger there? And boy, if there is, what a great opportunity to study that. Or are we engaging out of compassion, out of kindness? Because you can address the same problem from either standpoint. Impatience, I was talking about impatience. It's one of the paramis. I usually don't talk about the paramis because they're such a late addition to the tradition, but they're floating around. Impatience. Impatience is the opposite of patience. Patience is the parami, the perfection, and we're encouraged to cultivate it. We're encouraged to be more patient. But if you're telling yourself to be more patient, trying to cultivate patience, I want to be patient, and I want to be patient now. What do we want? Patience. When do we want it? Now. We can feel our impatience. You can feel it physically when you're in traffic. Anybody found themselves frustrated in a traffic jam or in a line at a supermarket? And then what do? You tell yourself to make it go away. Telling yourself to let go, giving yourself instructions is not what's going to free you. Insight will free you when you can see clearly and just watch it evaporate. Impatience is a form of aversion to what's going on because you want something else. So there's desire, there's wanting and impatience. I found that I was in a hurry. I was behind this guy. I could feel it in my body and the stories going on in my mind. There are other of the paramis that complaint can help with. The cultivation of upekkha, for example, equanimity. How do you tell yourself to be equanimous? Don't mind what's happening. I mean, does that work? Anybody find that work? But I had a friend who actually got a chance to be with Krishnamurti. At one point, he was asked the secret to his demeanor, because he was apparently fairly charismatic and just exuding peaceful. I don't know. I didn't meet him, but he was asked what the secret to his demeanor was, and he said, "My secret is I don't mind what happens." Minding happens. We don't say, I think I'll mind about this and I won't mind about that. It's not a choice we make. Minding is something that happens. Anger isn't a choice we make. We don't say, I think I'll be angry. This would be a good strategy in this situation. Anger just shows up. These things happen on their own. And so observing them is what we want to do. We want to watch the form of engagement. Virya, energy, one of the paramis. I was thinking about virya. What the perfection of energy. Just think, How would you do that? Tell yourself to be more energetic? You need the pep squad in your mind instead of the inner critic. I was thinking about observing the energy. You guys, I've talked about the V meter. Some people aren't familiar with it, so let me just describe it because it's a way of, it's a mindful tool. It's an app of the mind. If you go to the doctor and the doc says on a scale of 0 to 10, how is your pain? You can do that, right? I mean, it's not a precision measure, but you can come up with that, right? You could also say, on a scale of 0 to 10, how, with 10 being the most pleasurable and 0 being meh, where would you put vanilla ice cream? Can you find a number that vanilla ice cream? How about where would you put, let's say an apple? The same as the ice cream? Different? So you can have a whole scale from -10 to +10, -10 being the worst, most painful, beyond which is unconsciousness. 0 being the neutral point, and +10 being an ecstatic state beyond which is unconsciousness. And you can measure your feeling tone at any moment. It's the second factor of awakening, to measure your feeling tone. And you can actually, I've found, you can actually measure your feeling tone about any object of mind. So, for example, on a scale of -10 to +10, how would you, what is your feeling about Barack Obama? On a scale of -10 to +10, what's the feeling tone about Donald Trump? Probably not the same. So this is a way to, this I call it the V meter for Vedana, so it's measuring the feeling tone. But this is a technique for bringing mindful attention to our feeling tone, pleasant or unpleasant, which is really useful because we spend all our time trying to make things pleasant. So this is a device. It's an app of the mind. You can create a meter. You can create a scale. You can make them in neon or whatever you want. You can decorate it, but it has different functions. So here's another function. On the scale of 0 to 10, how much energy is present at the moment for you? At this point it might be a 3. Maybe a 4 for me, somewhere in there. A little bit upregulated because I'm talking. But this isn't the excitement of trying to, dance through traffic or merge at high speed in traffic. What's the level there? You can imagine it and using the V meter measure. Can you do that? Is that a useful tool for you? I find it pretty helpful. So you can measure, your level of sloth. Determination is one. We want to be more, determined, resolve. We study the background. There's a difference between a wish and a resolution. And they feel different. So we look at the physicality. It feels different to say, I want to lose some weight. And, then you make a decision to lose some weight. Then you just don't even see the food. You make a resolve to sit and not move for 20 minutes. Then you see what happens when you get an itch. I was like that. I think I might have mentioned this. On the Vedanameter scale, from it's a separate function, but the internal measurement scale, the Vedanameter scale, on a scale from 0 to 10, how intense is the itch? And on a scale of 0 to 10, how intense is the struggle to not scratch the itch? It's usually more than the itch itself. Sort of an example of how dukkha works. You have an itch, you have an unpleasant experience, and then you make it worse. So we can use this idea of paying attention to the way we engage the objects of our attention. You just pick one other one, which would be renunciation. I'm not a fan of renunciation of the word because it seems to carry some pretty heavy aversive baggage. But basically the idea is we are to abstain. I like abstain better. Abstain from the impulses of greed, hatred, and delusion. Abstain from upadana, from the three fires or the three poisons. We just have to notice, when is that happening? So for greed, you can, that's not hard to notice. Watch. I was walking behind a couple of high school girls at a mall a while ago, and one of them, this was before the pandemic, so it was a while ago, and one of them was saying to the other, I know I want something, I just don't know what it is. And my first thought was to sort of laugh at them, and then I thought, oh my gosh, that's me flipping through a catalog. Just looking for, it's looking for a target for that want. So you can, shopping, food, heading to the refrigerator, opening just to look to see what's inside. And the physicality of it. The hatred side is really interesting. We don't like to think of ourselves as, but any of you guys following the Matt Gaetz stuff? I think I can speak freely. Some of these people who are in impending legal jeopardy. And the word schadenfreude is, there's not a word in English for it, but it's the taking pleasure in the pain of others. And there's some people, we enjoy seeing them get their comeuppance, get their due. We enjoy that. And it's more often than you think. Watch the physical, particularly if this is coming up over any of the public figures out there that command the media's attention. Feel the physicality of your aversion to, and you can measure the amount of Vedanameter. One of the thing with the Vedanameter is interesting. When I was working in the prison, I would work with guys who were in solitary, and they knew everybody on the tier, and they had feelings about everybody on the tier. So they could, I suggested to them that they just measure their feeling tone about each guy. You can do that with everybody. Is your hand up, Mary Helen, or is that, you're muted? Oh, okay. Your hand is just up? Okay. Please feel free to unmute and interrupt. I don't mind at all. So we're trying to cultivate investigation. We're trying to cultivate skill in investigation. We want to get better at investigating the arising of things that make things worse, of greed, hatred, and delusion. The delusion part abstaining from delusion. How do we recognize delusion? Well, of course, complaint um, is a great reflection of delusion, because we we think that we could be satisfied if it were different. You know? But you can also find yourself, if you find yourself in dispute. The Buddha said, I teach a Dharma that does not dispute with the world. I don't dispute with the world. The world may dispute with me, but I don't dispute with the world. So if you find yourself arguing, quarreling, disputing, particularly if it's about the Dharma, it's certainly not about the Dharma. But disputes and quarrels and disagreements, a clue to delusion, a clue to clinging. So a lot of this stuff, all of it, arises automatically on its own. All this experience is happening on its own. Unless anybody planned to be here.
Hey, Tony,
Yeah.
can you explain delusion's a word I'd like to understand more about, like, how would you define it? How the examples are good that you use, but what's your definition of delusion?
Believing something is real when it isn't. So I have a card that sits over my computer that's a quote from the Lankavatara Sutra. It says, things are not as they seem, nor are they otherwise.
That's good.
So delusion is to think that they're, well, that they're different from that. You know, my daughter posted on her Facebook page a bit ago, the 3 stages of life: birth, what the fuck is this, and death. We're in that middle part here, you know. And I give people a chance. I've asked this in a lot of groups, because I think maybe somebody might know. Anybody in tonight's group know what's going on? Anybody?
Not a clue.
I can play the music for, the game show. I mean, nobody knows, and yet we'll take a position on something trivial. I know that the Earth is 13 billion years. Dispute, argument. So delusion is clinging to ideas about things as if they were real. Our ideas, our maps of the world are heuristic. I think a guy named Donald Hoffman, who's a neuroscientist from UC Irvine, I think, he says he uses a metaphor for consciousness that's interesting, because it's only possible recently. He said our consciousness, think of it as like your computer screen. On your computer screen, there's a folder, right? It's not really a folder. It's a representation of something going on inside the computer. But we see it as a folder, and it works for us. And if we drag it to the trash, and it's not really the trash. But if we drag it to the trash, something happens. It's not nothing happens. It's not that is it a delusion? You drag it to something happens, but what happens is you only see the folder in the trash. You don't see all the bits and bytes, and you couldn't actually relate to the bits and bytes. You have to have that interface. So our consciousness is an interface.
Can you define heuristic?
Heuristic is useful. It's something that's useful instead of true. It's useful for purposes. We'll adopt this for purposes of argument. It's
Like the
helpful.
trash.
It's
Like, yeah.
helpful. Hey, you know, I don't know what's keeping me stuck to the earth. I don't understand gravity. Nobody understands gravity. But, I've got it mapped into my neurology so that I can walk comfortably and I can even jump off a little curb these days. And, you know, I understand, but who knows what it is, really? You know what I mean? So heuristic, it will do for the present moment. It will get me, it's the map that we create in our mind, the conceptual map that enables us to navigate this experience. Sometimes I think that the way to characterize this life we're in is we're living in storyland. It's just one story after another. And some stories lead us to do things that make things worse, that hurt ourselves and others. So right view would be right story, right narrative. You can't be without a story. The neuroscience people say all those bits and bytes, we can't handle them all. So our mind uses story as the way to engage our experience, as the way to navigate the experience. And the story can be, we engage the story. The object is the story, and it can be implicit. Some of it can be implicit. It means it's not articulated. Like you know how to ride a bike, but you can't describe it in words. You can't articulate it in words. But you can get on a bike and say, see, I know how to ride a bike. It's the same with the freedom that the Buddha talks about. When he was asked once what was full understanding, and he said it's the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's an implicit understanding. They're just greed, hatred, and delusion. The thoughts come up on their own. The intentions arise on their own. You close your eyes to follow your thoughts, and what happens? To follow your breath, and what happens? Thoughts. And why do thoughts keep coming? You can't make them stop, because the neurology is just cranking them out like the heart is pumping blood. It's your mind, it's the brain working. And you can't really stop them. And intentions are the same way. The neuroscience people can measure the time between the arising of an intention and our awareness of it. And it's about 200 milliseconds. So intentions arise based on causes and conditions, not because of choice that we make. We make the choice based on our understanding. So we act out of our understanding. We act out of our... So right understanding, the Buddha's teaching of right understanding would be the understanding, the story, the recognition that allows us to recognize this stuff arising in us, the greed and impatience, and the delusion and impatience and aversion that's in complaint. And when you take sides, anger shows up. When you don't get what you want, you don't choose it, it just happens. It's the way the causes and conditions work. So our task is to observe and keep our eye on the ball. We'll let go as soon as we see that what we're holding on to is painful. And we don't need to do it. So that's a long way around talking about delusion. Is that helpful? Yes, no? Everybody's
Yes.
muted.
Yes, that's good.
So anything else? I guess we're on a 30-30-30 thing, and I've sort of wandered. I've drifted away. Anybody irritated by hypocrisy? Can you feel? I actually think that hypocrisy is one of those things that's really primal. One of the early things people learned to do. But the hypocrisy, we all do that. And yet we get so upset. Want to study it in yourself? Sometimes hypocrisy is appropriate. I think I've told you the story of my friend who's a chaplain, and she was working with this woman. She'd been working with her for about a hospice chaplain. She'd been working with this woman for about 6 weeks, and they'd become kind of friendly. And on the morning, as it turned out, of the day that she was to die, Lynn was fussing around the bed in the room, and the woman looked up and said, "I know you're a Buddhist chaplain, but you do believe in Jesus Christ and the resurrection, don't you?" And she said, "Of course." She said you could see her just relax because she'd been worrying that her friend was going to go to hell. So hypocrisy and truthful speech may not be kind, may not be compassionate. So what do you guys think? Anything, any comments? Particularly complaints. I'm up for complaints. Anybody can unmute themselves and just, yeah, Jim, you're muted. Jim.
Yeah, you were using analogies towards the beginning of your talk about sports, and you mentioned baseball, and I think you alluded to football, but having participated in competitive sports most of my life, this kind of discussion makes me question the whole concept of, because if you're going to be on a team sport, you're on a side. You've chosen sides. You got one side's the good guys and one side's the bad guys, and that's the way it's been. It seems forever in athletics. How do you comment on that in terms of a Buddhist perspective? Makes me think that one should raise their kids today and not let them compete in any sports.
You're looking for an answer what you should do, but how I see that, I see sports as a metaphor for the way humans interact in the world. And it is different when you're on a team, but what if you look at a sport that you've got no particular interest in? Mm-hmm. You can see what's going on. Yep. It's you're whomping at each other with tennis balls, or you're out racing each other. There are different kinds of sports. There's the head-to-head, and there's the races. But what is the motivation behind what's going on? And there's no right answer to this. I'm not sure there is such a thing as a Buddhist perspective. The idea, I guess, would be to see what's going on in your mind and in your heart as you act out these things. And chess is the same thing, except it's mental combat, mental competition.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. I've said this, I think, before in our group, even in years ago, perhaps. But the only activity or sport I would say that I participated in for a long, long time that wasn't competitive, that is, I did it just for the fun of it, was skiing. In other words, I skied for 60 years and loved every bit of it, but I've never skied competitively as a racer. And I thought about that in the past, and I said, that's why I liked it so much. I wasn't trying to win, and so I didn't have the agony of victory and the agony of how that one goes.
The agony, yes, true.
So that was sort of an insight I thought at the time.
Yeah.
I I recently read a book by Miguel Ruiz Jr. and they use the perspective like of a fan again around sports, but the perspective of fans. And the title of the book was Five Levels of Attachment.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was really interesting because it went from the benign, not attached to either side to the fifth level of attachment of the fanatic that would shoot the opposite fan
Going
or
down with the ship, yeah.
right. It
Yeah.
was a really good perspective, levels of attachment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the idea behind the Buddhist teaching is that we should free ourselves from holding on to what causes us suffering and pain. But we just don't see that we're doing that. We think scratching the itch makes us feel better. Anger blots out the pain and sadness. Sadness is, if you haven't made friends with sadness, it's time. I mean, it's a huge part of life. People don't want to feel it, and so they flail around and do damage to themselves and others rather than just, sadness is one of the elements in the First Noble Truth. All the unpleasantness of life is in that First Noble Truth. Pain, sorrow, distress, not getting what you want, aging, sickness.
Tony, it's Gabrielle.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about how people interact as groups, whether it's politics or sports or even religion, often there's a lot of I win, you lose competition. Almost like little kindergartners in the sandbox going, neener, neener, neener. But there's also a tremendous amount of satisfaction in teamwork together. Like as a Sangha or part of a Code Blue team or a rescue team going after refugees. There's different ways of interacting with each other as groups that doesn't have to be competitive and can be very satisfying.
Well, it's interesting. I think that both of those responses, I understand human behavior in terms of evolutionary psychology and development. So we evolved for 100,000 years in tribes of 50 to 75. Everyone was important. We had to work together or die. Those of us that didn't pass on their genes. So we've got this great cooperation thing going, the great compassion thing going with the people in our tribe. But another tribe that you see across the way, it may be okay. Maybe you could go and be friendly, but if you are wrong and you go and be friendly and they take you out, you don't pass on your genes. So what we've over millennia, literally, we've cultivated antipathy to strangers, just a cautiousness that's different from the way we relate to people in our family, in our tribe. We're primates. Primates they take care of their young, but they also kill each other. I'm reading a book about what the title is, but it's basically men behaving badly, and it's an evolutionary psychologist. They've done a huge amount of study, and a lot of the bad behavior is it's not our fault.
Tony, I was so struck by what you said when you said, I wrote it down. I see primates fighting when you were talking about.
Yeah, look at them.
I mean, that is such a profound thing. It's so strong in us.
And the anger. When everybody was waiting for the Derek Chauvin verdict, and everybody knew that if the verdict was not guilty, that there would be, because we know that the anger is there, and when the conditions are right, that anger will show up, and that anger is accumulated karma its intentions from years. How are you going to address that in the Middle East? You know, generational, there are people who feel attached to land they've never lived on. These are dreams, these are visions, you know. And so we are lost in our visions and we act out as primates do. Oh, one of the things in this book about men behaving badly, there was an example of a certain kind of gorilla, I think, where the males, when they would hook up with a new female, they would kill all the other babies, all of the female's previous babies, because it's about their genes. No rivals. Pretty brutal. You know, I watched my dog give birth to 8 puppies and one was very weak and she crushed it. You know. Not use her energy on one that's not going to be strong. I don't know. So I use evolution as a way to interpret as a story about tanha, which is the disposition to like our experience pleasant, and to our disposition to want to make unpleasant experience go away, and to survive, to keep on keeping on, bhava tanha. And that seems to me, you know, that's in ourselves, and we act it out. We don't usually observe it. And you can't actually observe a disposition or a preference anyway. I mean, somebody says that person has a preference for chocolate over vanilla. You can't actually point at anything and say that thing is the preference. You just point at you say, see, pick chocolate again. So preference is something that you conjure up to explain why they always do chocolate, and tanha is like that. But upadana, greed, hatred, and delusion, we can observe our wanting, we can observe our anger and our fear, and we can observe our delusion in our disputes, in our arguments, our quarrels. I don't know. I'm rambling. Does that address anything that you were bringing up, Mary Ellen?
Yeah, it just seems so profound that we are primates and we're looking for a fight.
Well, if you take that perspective and look at the Middle East, look at the state of this country's society and democracy, we take sides. We cling. We like to say, yeah, I understand impatience, but oh no, not the Bill of Rights. Impermanence. We understand impermanence, but not the Bill of Rights, not the rule of law, not civil society. No. Otherwise, I don't cling.
Well, our own being drawn to tribalism, that everybody appears to be drawn to tribalism, even the best of us. And that seems to be the root of all evil.
Well, evil is.
Well, that's just
the word that usually gets translated as evil in the Pali is papa, and it's not really evil. The word is means that which leads us to suffering. That's which makes things. That's what
right.
that which makes things worse.
Right.
But I think there's plenty that makes things worse. It's greed, hatred, and delusion, not just tribalism. Because you can, if you don't take sides, the tribalism disappears. So you can study your own tribalism. You'll protect your family. Donna, generosity. You drive out of a parking lot and you pass a mother and her child with a sign. We just don't even see them. We don't let ourselves see them. If you looked at them and it was your mother, you'd stop immediately. So that's all coming out of you. That's what we want to study. That study your own tribalism. It starts with family,
Sure.
and then friends and associates but the Buddha's point was the people are not evil. Greed, hatred, and delusion, that's what we have to worry about. And of course, people who are awash in that, how do you rescue them? I'm not sure. I think maybe that's a taller order than any of us can. How can you rescue the Middle East? How can you rescue the people who are convinced that the election was a big lie? How do you rescue those people? And can you? Should you? Or should we just, if you don't take sides, what are we seeing? We're seeing deluded people angry at each other. Primates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Please just unmute yourself first. You're muted.
Tony, if we don't take sides, isn't that really the opportunity to engage in compassion,
Oh,
to exercise the observation and the heart-based behavior of what do we have in common?
oh, absolutely. That's right. Taking sides is a form of clinging, of course. And yeah, that's absolutely right.
I guess that's the only thing that gives me hope at times when I see how screwed up our world seems to be.
Well, people seem to be screwed up. The question is, what are you going to do this afternoon?
That's tricky, like anything. How far do you go, with not taking sides, and therefore don't vote? Therefore, it's.
Well, this isn't a determination to be made. We're not looking for an answer. How far do you go? Where's the bright line? We're looking to develop a skill. Remember, it's a skill and not answers. We don't need to know how far we go. We just need to know how to go forward without hurting ourselves and others, without making things worse for ourselves and others, without adding greed, hatred, and delusion into the mix.
I guess what I'm hearing, Marie, what I heard in my mind when Marie said what she just said was, if you don't take sides, how do you stand up for what you believe in?
Well, it depends on what you believe in.
My side.
Yeah, right. But if you don't take sides, you can address climate change out of compassion or out of anger.
Mm.
Gil was teaching he had a chaplaincy course in eco chaplaincy, and I didn't get a chance to take the course, and I was not allowed to just drop in. But my understanding was that it was designed to provide comfort to all of us who are suffering from anxieties and the actual physical consequences of climate change, to provide support for people suffering from, wildfire burn or toxic spill or cancer cluster or, and fears about how do we deal with our fears about the future. Those are all abstractions. Those are all things that live in our mind. When it comes to what are we going to do right now, when we look for answers, we want to plot things out in advance, way ahead, so that we know what we're going to do. But you never know what you're going to do, because the conditions are never the way you plan for them. You know, it's the first truth of military combat is that your plan doesn't survive past the first assault. Nothing goes as you plan it. Haven't you noticed? I mean, really. We want it to go as a plan so much that we, instead of noticing that it just never does, we get angry when it doesn't. Frustrated, irritated. Isn't that right?
Tony, it's Gabrielle.
Yeah,
I just have a practical question.
yeah.
Our library at the temple is way overloaded, and we often have redundant copies of books about Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those spare copies be of use to you in your work in the prison? And if so, would you like me to post my email in the chat?
The prison is closed to volunteers right now and has been for a year.
Yeah.
So I may have jeopardized my status there by corresponding with some of the men. When you go in as a volunteer chaplain, you're not supposed to have offline relationships with the men that are not part of your program. So I don't know whether anybody's noticed. I'll have to see when they open things up. But you know, do you know Diane Wild? You must know Diane.
No.
Ah. Send me your email address.
I'll put it in the chat.
There's a group, the Buddhist Pathways Prison Project, which I've worked with, and they do Buddhist services. I did Buddhist services and mental health services too. But they may be able to make use, and they'll be poised to go back in when as soon as they can.
Merci beaucoup.
I'm looking. I still don't see. I'm looking in the chat and don't see it. But I will copy it if I get it.
I'll help get it to you if Gabrielle doesn't put it in the chat.
That's fine. Let's not worry about it. Anything else? Oh, there is something else. You guys like to end with the Metasutta. Whether it's by Zoom or in person. So this is what is to be done by those who are skilled in goodness and who know the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. And wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, those seen and unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should we cherish all living beings, and radiating kindness over the entire world, reaching upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outward and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, one should sustain this recollection. It is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision and free from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you, guys. Terry Ray, don't go away. Don't go away.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's
Oh,
great.
my pleasure.
Thank you
I'll
very
see-
much.
I'll
Thank
see
you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony.
Mhm.
Thank you, Tony.
Anna and Joyce, if we don't see you on Zoom, have a good time in Alaska.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great time.
You
Get to go travel. How cool.
Yeah, remember travel.
Good seeing everybody here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony.
Very
Senior
rich.
Patty, thank you.
It's just so great to see you. I haven't seen you in years.
Thank you so much, Tony. I've been meaning to join you. I got on John Travis's mailing list,
Uh-huh.
and I would sit with him actually.